I arrived at my own daughter's wedding and was confronted with my photo on the door, with the words "No entry" right below it. I was stopped and humiliated in front of the entire family, turned into a stranger on what should have been a day of celebration. I didn't make a scene, I didn't shout, I just stared at the security guard, took back the large envelope I was holding, and left silently. She thought the humiliation was the end of the story. Little did she know it was only the beginning. The next day, it was she who called me, not to apologize, but to beg. My name is Elias, and at 68, I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I had experienced the fullness of joy and the depths of sorrow, that the wrinkles on my face were a faithful map of my life, each line a reminder of a battle fought or a heartfelt smile shared, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the day my heart was crushed on the doorstep of an event venue where I was meant to celebrate the greatest gift life ever gave me, my only daughter. Getting married. I was impeccable in that custom-tailored navy suit, which felt like a suit of armor. Every stitch, every fold, carefully aligned, was a shield I hoped would protect me from the barbs that had been flying for months. In the inner pocket of my jacket, my heart beat in time with the small velvet box, soft and heavy in my palm. Inside it were the keys to a house on the hill, with a breathtaking view of the valley, and the deed, a wedding gift that had taken years of work and sacrifice to make a reality. It was my legacy, the material proof of my unconditional love for Mariana. Why unconditional? Because, in recent months, my daughter's sweetness had curdled into a sharp coldness. Her words, once affectionate, were now brief, almost evasive. And the cause, I knew, was him, the groom, a man in an expensive suit and a smile polished a little too bright, whose eyes, behind the charming facade, glittered with an ambition that chilled me to the bone. He spoke of business, of opportunities, with an intensity that seemed to devour any genuine emotion. I swallowed Mariana's indifferent treatment, the groom's condescending remarks about my old-fashioned mindset, all of it. I swallowed it because a father's love, I believed, should be a boundless river, flowing around any rock, over any obstacle. That gift, the dream house, was the bridge I hoped would reconnect us, to show her, despite everything, how much I loved her. The autumn sun, which had earlier painted the sky a promising gold, now seemed to mock me, glinting off the polished metal of my car as I approached the venue. The soft music of a string quartet could already be heard, a melodic invitation that, strangely, didn't feel like it was for me. The elegantly dressed guests floated through the entrance, smiles and hugs spreading through the air. I got out of the car, adjusted my suit, and with a sigh that held all my hope and a touch of apprehension, I walked toward the entrance. It was there, before I even set foot on the extended red carpet, that the unconditionality of my love met its brutal limit. On an elegant easel, adorned with floral arrangements that seemed too exotic for such a personal celebration, rested a photo of me, a recent one, taken during one of the few moments when Mariana still smiled at me. Below it, in large, merciless block letters, two words pierced my chest like stakes of ice: entry forbidden. The murmur of the guests, once a festive sound, turned into the buzzing of angry hornets in my ears. I saw familiar faces, my brothers, nephews, lifelong friends, turn toward me, their smiles fading, replaced by expressions of shock and embarrassment. I felt the heat rise to my face, a wave of shame I couldn't control. I was barred from my own daughter's wedding, publicly humiliated in front of everyone I knew, in front of my entire family and all my friends. The ground seemed to spin, my knees nearly buckled, and then she appeared, Mariana. In her wedding dress, so white and ethereal, she looked like an apparition. Her face, framed by the veil, was emotionless, devoid of the sweetness I had once adored. She walked to the entrance, not to welcome me, not to defend me, but to confirm the sentence. "It's my day, Dad," she said, her voice low but clear, without a hint of remorse or hesitation, "and the groom and his family don't feel comfortable with you here." My hands, still clutching the small velvet box, trembled. The cold, naked truth hit me with the force of a punch. I didn't argue. The pain was too sharp for words, for any attempt at defense. I just looked at the small box in my hands. Then at her, at the eyes that were once the mirror of my soul and were now like two polished stones. Then I turned my back. I took my gift back, with a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to weigh a ton, and started walking back to the car. Each step was a monumental effort, as if my feet were stuck in cement. The whispers, the looks of pity or shock, were invisible knives stabbing me in the back. In the deafening silence of my car, which now felt like an isolation chamber, the armor of my suit shattered into invisible pieces, and the man underneath, Elias, the father, was utterly broken. The tears, long held back, finally came, hot and bitter, washing away the dust of a shattered hope. But beneath the searing pain, beneath the desolation that threatened to consume me, a cold, unbreakable resolution began to form, crystalline and urgent. The next day, when the phone rang, I knew, with a strange and premonitory certainty, that it wouldn't be an apology. It would be a cry of panic. The shrill ring of the phone tore through the quiet of my morning, which had dawned grey and heavy, like an omen. The night before had been an eternity of sleeplessness. The image of those two words, "entry forbidden," seared into my mind. My head throbbed, and my heart still carried a weight that felt immense. I knew, as I said, that this call wouldn't bring solace, but rather a new twist in the whirlwind of emotions that engulfed me. The calm with which I answered, however, surprised me. It wasn't a calm of peace, but of a newfound determination, forged in the furnace of humiliation. "Dad?" The voice on the other end of the line was choked, a thin, trembling thread of panic. It wasn't the cold, indifferent voice I had heard at the venue door, but the voice of a lost, frightened child. "Where are the keys?" "The deed?" she asked, her tone rising in desperation. "We were supposed to move in today." The whirlwind honeymoon, which I'd heard was at a luxury resort, had lasted little more than 24 hours. Reality, for Mariana and her new husband, had knocked on their door sooner than they expected. I sat in the armchair in the living room, the same one where I had so often heard her share her childhood dreams, and closed my eyes for a moment. The sun streamed through the window, but its light did not dispel the darkness within me. "What keys, sweetheart?" I replied, my voice sounding surprisingly steady, even to me. I could picture her face, the expression of confusion, of disbelief, now mixing with panic. "You banished me from your life, Mariana. You kicked me out of your wedding, your special day. The gift, the house, was part of that life, a life where my love and my presence were welcome." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, hoping my words, with their quiet weight, would penetrate the fog of her self-assurance. On the other end, I heard a ragged gasp, followed by a muffled sound, as if she had dropped the phone or was struggling to compose herself. The image that came to mind was of the groom, now her husband, standing beside her, likely with a dark expression. The ambition in his eyes turning to frustration. Their plan, I realized then, was simple and terribly cruel. Humiliate the father, get married, and the next day, take possession of the luxurious life I had spent a lifetime building for her. But they had underestimated the man they humiliated. They had underestimated the depth of my love, yes, but also the strength of my dignity. The first turn of events didn't take long. A few hours after the phone call, I received a call from my lawyer, Dr. Miller, a prudent man of few words but with a sharp intellect. His voice, normally calm, held a note of surprise. "Elias, your daughter and her husband tried to get into the house on the hill. he informed me. They found a private security team at the door with your express orders not to allow anyone entry. There was a small incident, some words were exchanged, but nothing serious. They were visibly upset. A bitter smile curved my lips. I had anticipated this. In that silence in the car, after the humiliation, the first thing I did was call Dr. Miller and give him clear, irrefutable instructions. The house was under my protection, so to speak. It was mine, and I would decide who had the privilege of entering it. The orders were clear. No one, not even Mariana, without my express permission. Their reaction, as expected, was immediate and furious. Desperate and without the keys, they sued me. The lawsuit alleged that the house was a promised gift and that my vindictive attitude was causing them irreparable emotional distress. They launched a public smear campaign, using the internet and local media to paint me as a cruel old man, a heartless father who had disowned his own daughter over a petty whim. Social media posts, comments on news sites, everything was aimed at undermining my reputation, at isolating me further. Lifelong friends called me, some confused, others shocked, wanting to understand. I simply said that things were not as they seemed, that the truth would come out. But inside, the pain of seeing my name, my character, dragged through the mud by my own daughter was almost as excruciating as the humiliation at the wedding. While they made noise, shouting their distorted version of the story to anyone who would listen, I acted in silence. Like an underground river, my actions were invisible but powerful. The same day I was banished, I contacted an old acquaintance, a private investigator named Rick, a discreet man with whom I had worked on a corporate fraud case years ago. "Rick," I said, "I need you to look into my new ex-son-in-law. Everything. From his childhood to today. Leave no stone unturned." The results were swift and, to me, shocking, although in hindsight, I should have seen it coming. Rick handed me a thick dossier just 2 days later, while the buzz about the cruel father still echoed through the city. The pages revealed a grim picture. My son-in-law's family was on the verge of bankruptcy, their companies mired in debt and on the brink of collapse. The wedding wasn't a union of love, as I had feared. It was a con. They desperately needed my house and my name, my spotless reputation, to leverage new loans and save their failing businesses. My daughter, blinded by the promise of a social status she had always coveted, by the illusion of a life of luxury, had been the perfect bait to lure me, the provider. With every page I turned, I felt a mix of anger and a deep sorrow. Anger for being so manipulated, for being used, and sorrow for Mariana, for her naivety, for her willful blindness. I loved her more than my own life, and to see how she allowed herself to be used, how she participated in it all, was an open wound. It was as if a part of my Mariana, the one I knew, had been stolen and replaced by a stranger. Their next move wasn't long in coming. We received news that they had obtained a temporary injunction based on testimonies from friends, in quotes, because I knew they were more like conveniences about my supposed emotional instability after the passing of my wife, Mariana's mother, a few years ago. The injunction gave them temporary access to the house. For a moment, a thread of despair tightened around my heart. It seemed that their lie, so well orchestrated and full of half-truths, might actually prevail. Their lawyer, a confidant of my son-in-law's family, seemed very sure of himself, adjusting his glasses on his nose with an air of triumph. But while they celebrated the injunction as a victory, my investigator, Rick, made a discovery that would completely change the game. He called me with an urgency in his voice I had never heard before, informing me of something that would make their situation crumble. The twist was far bigger than any of us could have imagined, and I knew that the chessboard of life had just had its pieces turned upside down. I could smell victory, but first I needed one last piece in my game. What would be my next move? Rick's voice echoed in my mind. The urgency in his tone, the gravity of his words, had pierced the dense fog of my own pain. Elias, he's not just broke, Rick told me, the words heavy with a restrained tension. He's involved in a much bigger scheme. Fraud, money laundering. And the worst part, he plans to use the deed to your house as collateral in an illegal transaction. It's a risky move, but they're desperate. The news hit me like a lightning strike. This wasn't just about manipulation or a con to get material assets. It was something much darker, with serious legal implications. My house, the fruit of years of hard work and the symbol of my love for Mariana, was to be tainted by a crime. The image of my son-in-law, always so polished and confident, now twisted in my mind, revealing the predator behind the facade. I felt a shiver of revulsion, followed by a cold, calculated rage. It was no longer just about me, about Mariana. It was about justice. I immediately called Dr. Miller, my lawyer. He listened with his characteristic attention, asking a few pointed questions but not interrupting. "Dr. Miller," I began, my voice firm, "I need a meeting, now. And I need you to prepare something very specific, a trust fund for Mariana, with the house as the primary asset." He sighed, an almost inaudible sound, but I could sense his surprise. "Elias, that's unexpected, after everything that's happened." "Yes," I replied, my voice unwavering, "and with a very special clause. An honor clause, if you will. Any act by the beneficiary that brings public dishonor or intentional humiliation to the trustee will result in the immediate dissolution of the fund, with all assets reverting to charity." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I knew the clause was, at the very least, unusual, perhaps even unprecedented, but it was my way of protecting not only my assets, but also the value of loyalty and respect. Dr. Miller, after a moment, said only, "Understood. Elias, leave it to me." The following days were a calculated dance of patience and strategy. While Mariana and her husband gloated about their temporary injunction, believing they had won a victory, I was setting the stage for our final confrontation. I let them enjoy their false sense of security, watching them from afar through the eyes of Rick, the investigator, who continued to gather more and more details about my son-in-law's fraudulent transactions. Each new piece of information was another brick in the wall I was building around them. The city, meanwhile, continued to whisper. The rumors of my emotional instability and vindictive attitude fueled conversations in coffee shops and at country clubs. Distant friends avoided me, some with looks of pity, others with morbid curiosity. The closest ones, those who truly knew me, expressed their confusion and, in some cases, their disappointment that I was turning my back on my daughter. With every comment, every glance, I felt a pang of pain, but my resolve remained unshaken. I knew what I was doing, and I knew that in the end, the truth would come out. And with it, justice. The climax was orchestrated by me with the precision of a watchmaker. I scheduled a conciliation meeting, mediated by the lawyers, in an elegant downtown office. I suggested it be a meeting to present the facts and try for an amicable agreement. They, of course, readily accepted, arriving with their lawyers, arrogant, certain that the injunction gave them the upper hand, and that I, the unhinged old father, was finally caving. In the conference room, the tension was palpable. I entered, accompanied by Dr. Miller, with the serenity of someone who knows exactly what is about to happen. Mariana and her husband were seated at the table, he with a smug smile, she with an expression that mixed confidence with a slight apprehension. Their lawyers, two starched men with an air of superiority, arranged their briefcases with pomp. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I didn't offer a defense against their accusations. I didn't try to justify my absence from the wedding. Instead, calmly, I opened the folder Rick had prepared. I began to read aloud. Without emotion, the details from the investigator's dossier, the irrefutable proof of the imminent bankruptcy of my son-in-law's companies, the bank statements showing the movement of money from the fraud, the names of the shell companies. Each word was a stake through the heart of the narrative they had constructed. The smug smile on my son-in-law's face faltered. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now showed a flicker of panic. Mariana, beside him, shrank slightly. Her eyes fixed on me, a growing confusion in her gaze. Their lawyers, who had been so self-assured before, now exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. But the ace up my sleeve, the real surprise, was yet to come. Dr. Miller, at my request, handed them a copy of the document he had prepared, the one establishing the trust fund. The gift I planned to give Mariana wasn't just the house, I began, my voice echoing in the silent room. And it was the creation of a trust fund in her name, with the house being the first asset. At first, I saw a glimmer of hope in Mariana's face, a recognition of my love, perhaps. But I continued, my voice without hesitation. A fund that I, as the trustee, would manage until she turned 40 to ensure her security and her future. Her husband, realizing the house would still be out of his control, frowned, the panic resurfacing. But it was the next sentence, read by Dr. Miller in a loud, clear voice, that sealed their fate. However, he read, his voice grave, the document contains an honor clause. Any act by the beneficiary that brings public dishonor or intentional humiliation to the trustee will result in the immediate dissolution of the fund, with all assets reverting to charity. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. It was the silence of the naked, relentless truth. My son-in-law's face turned pale, a greenish hue of despair. Mariana beside him looked at me, understanding and terror flooding her eyes. She wouldn't just lose the house, she would lose everything. And her husband, now exposed as a criminal, was about to face criminal charges that could destroy his life forever. I had turned the tables once and for all, and the scales of justice, finally, were beginning to tip. But what would this mean for Mariana's future? And how would I, Elias, deal with the consequences of such a drastic act? The answer was only just beginning to unfold. The silence in the conference room was deafening, broken only by the subtle sound of my son-in-law's heavy breathing. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of seconds. His eyes, once cunning, were now fixed on me, a toxic mix of panic, anger, and a hint of helplessness. Mariana, at his side, seemed to have lost all color. Her lips trembled slightly, and her eyes, once filled with a blind confidence, were brimming with unshed tears. The brutal understanding of what that honor clause meant, coupled with the irrefutable proof of the fraud, seemed to come crashing down on her like a house of cards. I watched them. There was no satisfaction in my chest, only a deep sadness and the feeling that this, while just, was a painful cut into my own flesh. Dr. Miller, with his usual composure, closed the dossier folder, the dry, final sound echoing in the room. Their lawyers, once so assertive, were now whispering among themselves, their faces twisted in a mixture of disbelief and dismay. The game was over, and they had lost everything. The initial shock gave way to a controlled explosion of emotions. My son-in-law's lawyer, trying to reclaim some dignity, began to protest, speaking of coercion, of a personal attack. But his words felt hollow, empty. Dr. Miller, with a calm gesture, showed him the impeccably prepared legal documents that ratified every detail of the trust fund and the clause. The law was on my side, and the truth, finally, had been revealed. My daughter, Mariana, stood up abruptly, her eyes now full of tears that finally overflowed, fixed on me. There was no anger, no more arrogance, just a raw vulnerability that reminded me of the little girl who once ran into my arms. "Dad," she began, her voice breaking, a plea in every syllable, but the words wouldn't come. She was undone. I didn't answer. I just watched her, my heart aching with a complex emotion that mixed the pain of her pain with the firmness of my decision. What I felt wasn't satisfaction, but a kind of bittersweet relief that I had stopped her from being dragged even deeper into her husband's web of lies and crimes, and bittersweet because of the painful way this lesson had to be learned. The meeting ended abruptly. They shuffled out of the room like defeated shadows. The silence that followed their departure was a relief, but also a heavy reminder of what had just happened. Dr. Miller looked at me, his face expressing a mixture of respect and understanding. It was a bold move, Elias, but it was the only one possible. I just nodded, exhausted, but with a strange sense of peace. That night, she came to my house. Not the arrogant bride from the wedding day, nor the desperate voice on the phone. This was a broken woman, hunched under the weight of reality. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when the doorbell rang. Rick, who had become a kind of protective shadow, had alerted me to her arrival. When I opened the door, there she was, Mariana, huddled, her face swollen and red from crying. She wasn't wearing the expensive clothes her husband had provided, but simple jeans and a blouse, looking almost like a child. "Dad," she whispered, and then she broke down. Not in fury, not in argument, but in convulsive sobs. She knelt right there on the living room rug, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking. "Forgive me," she murmured between sobs. "Please forgive me." I watched her, the stranger wearing my daughter's face, and my heart broke a little more. I loved her, always would, but the pain she had caused me, the betrayal of her trust, was a deep wound that would not heal easily. I knelt down, getting to her level, and touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold. "Mariana," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Get up. This isn't how we fix things." She raised her face, her eyes red and pleading. I didn't know, Dad. I swear. He promised me so many things. I was blind. I wanted that life so badly." I moved back a little, sat on the sofa, and invited her to sit beside me. She hesitated, then sat, keeping a cautious distance. "I know, Mariana. I know he promised you a lot. I know you wanted that life, and I wanted to give you the world, my daughter. I always have, but not at this cost." The words were harsh, but necessary. It was time for her to see reality without the veils of illusion. "Dad, please," she begged, her hands clasped in a desperate gesture. "Don't dissolve the fund. Don't turn the evidence of his fraud over to the authorities. He'll be arrested. We'll lose everything. I don't know what to do." She pleaded for a second chance, not to have the house immediately, but to not have her life completely destroyed. To not be dragged into the abyss with the man who had manipulated her. I looked at her for a long time, trying to see past the frightened and disillusioned woman to the Mariana I once knew. It was like looking into a cracked mirror, her image distorted, but still there. The decision I had to make wasn't easy. It wasn't about revenge. It was about what was right for her future, even if she couldn't see it now. Her fate, in a way, was in my hands, and I knew that the choice I would make in that moment would redefine not only her life, but also our relationship forever. But what would that choice be? And how could I be both just and loving? The night was just beginning, and the conversation that followed would be the hardest of our lives. The room was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by Mariana's sobs. I watched her, feeling the weight of all the years I'd seen her grow, of every shared laugh, every wiped tear. Her pain was palpable, but the wound in my own heart still bled from the humiliation and betrayal. It was a decisive moment, a watershed that would define the future of our relationship. I couldn't act on impulse, nor out of simple pity. I needed to be fair, but also somehow rekindle the flame of responsibility in her soul. "Mariana," I said, my voice gentle but firm like a foundation, "I won't dissolve the fund." A flicker of hope sparked in her eyes, a slight lift in her slumped shoulders. "But it will be frozen, untouchable. You will not have access to it, nor to the house, until you prove you can support yourself, that you can build something on your own." She looked at me, confused, and I continued. "You will have to divorce him, get a real job, and start building your own life, Mariana, without his shadow, without the shadow of my money, or what you thought you deserved without effort." Her face, once marked by panic, now filled with a mixture of shock and incomprehension. "But Dad, I don't know how to do that. I've always had everything. I don't know what a real job is." The innocence, or perhaps the blindness in her words, hit me as a painful reminder of how I, without realizing it, had coddled her, shielding her from the realities of the world. My guilt in that was a burden I also carried. "It's time to learn, my daughter," I said, my voice a little harder. "It's time to learn the value of effort, of dignity, of independence. I didn't give you the house so you could be a puppet in the hands of an ambitious man. I gave it for your security, for your future, when you had the maturity to manage it." Then I took an envelope from my inner jacket pocket, not the fraud dossier, but another, less bulky one. "The evidence against your husband," I said, handing the envelope to her. Her hands trembled as she took it. "It's in here. What you do with it, whether to protect yourself or to sink with him, will be the first decision of your new life. I will not hand it over to the authorities. That choice will be yours. The responsibility for your own actions, for your future, begins now." She looked at the envelope in her hands, then at me, her eyes wide, terror and a new understanding mixing in her gaze. It was as if, for the first time, she was seeing the abyss opening beneath her feet, but also the thin bridge I was offering. Responsibility was a weight she had never had to carry, and the fear of having to do it alone was palpable. The conversation stretched late into the night. She cried, argued, pleaded again, but I remained firm. I explained to her with patience and, I hope, with love, that life wasn't a fairy tale where problems magically disappear. That a father's love didn't mean solving all her problems, but rather teaching her how to solve them herself. That true dignity came from one's own effort, from honesty, and not from the false glitter of social status. She told me about her husband's promises, the grandiose plans, the way he had convinced her that I was an obstacle to their happiness, a controlling old man who didn't understand the modern world. Her words were an echo of what I had already suspected, confirming the manipulation he had wielded over her. I felt a new pang of anger, but forced myself to keep it in check. "Mariana," I said after a long silence, "he didn't love you. He loved what you represented, what I represented, the financial security, the name, the opportunity to launder his money. He used you, my daughter, and you, unfortunately, allowed yourself to be used." The truth was cruel, but it was the truth. She shrank, the tears flowing again. "I know, Dad, I know now. I was so foolish." It was the first time I had heard her admit her own share of the responsibility, and that, to me, was a sign of hope. The night ended with a tenuous promise. She said she would think about everything I said, that she would consider my conditions. There was no hug, no complete reconciliation. The wound was too deep for that. But there was a new beginning, a crack in the armor of arrogance and illusion she had built. I knew the road would be long and difficult for her. For me, too. I hadn't given her the house. I had given her back the responsibility for her own actions. The lesson was harsh, but perhaps one day she would understand that it was the greatest gift I had ever given her. In the following days, the phone no longer rang with Mariana's pleas. The silence, once a burden, was now a space for reflection. Rick informed me that her husband, without the deed to the house and with the evidence of fraud hanging over him, had disappeared from the city. His family, without the expected injection of capital, was on the verge of ruin. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another, even more uncertain. I wondered what Mariana would do, if she would have the courage to face reality, to take the reins of her own life. The weight was agonizing, but I knew this was the only way for her to truly grow. I had planted the seed of change, but she was the one who would have to water and cultivate it. And as I waited, a new and unexpected series of events began to unfold in my own life, bringing to light a long-buried mystery, something Mariana's mother had entrusted to me before she passed. A secret that now seemed to be crying out for my attention, promising a new journey of discovery and perhaps, just maybe, of healing. The house on the hill, once a symbol of my love and of a future I dreamed of for Mariana, now stood empty, looming over the city like a silent reminder of the battle that had been fought. The silence in my own home was a mix of relief and a strange melancholy. Mariana's pleas had ceased, and with them, the city's buzz about the cruel father also faded, replaced by a restrained curiosity. I knew that the story of my daughter and her husband was now a matter of whispers and speculation. But the intensity had waned. Rick, my investigator, confirmed the disappearance of my ex-son-in-law. He had vanished, leaving a trail of debt and an impending scandal. His family, as predicted, was in freefall, their businesses crumbling like a sandcastle. I felt a cold relief. At least Mariana wouldn't be dragged to the bottom of that pit. But the big question remained. What would she do now? The days turned into a week of tense quiet. I found myself staring at the phone, wondering if she would call, if she would ask for advice, or if she would simply disappear like her husband. My father's heart yearned for a sign, but my mind told me that this waiting was crucial for her maturation. I had given her the tools to build her new life, but she had to wield them herself. It was on one of these reflective afternoons, while I was organizing some of my late wife Anna's old papers, that a long-forgotten object caught my eye. It was a small, carved wooden box, a gift Anna had received from her grandmother, which she always kept locked. She never revealed its contents to me, only saying it was something very private, a secret that belonged to her lineage. After she passed a few years ago, I never had the courage to open it, to invade her privacy, so to speak. Now, however, a strange sense of urgency compelled me to do so. The key, I remembered, was kept in a small locket Anna wore around her neck. I found it among her jewelry, a silver heart with a tiny recess. I opened the box, my heart beating a little faster. Inside, there was a stack of yellowed letters, tied with a faded silk ribbon, and a leather-bound diary. But this wasn't what Anna had confided to me before she passed, with a look full of mystery and a weak voice. She had spoken of a truth that would change everything, of a legacy that needed to be discovered. As I removed the letters, I noticed a false bottom in the box. Beneath it lay an old, faded photograph of a woman who looked very much like Anna, but with a different expression, more serious, almost melancholic, and a gold medallion engraved with a coat of arms. But what really caught my attention was a small, hand-drawn map with notes in an elegant script I didn't recognize. It was a map of a mountainous region, with an X marked over what appeared to be a small town or village, and next to the X, a phrase written in Latin, Veritas vos liberabit, the truth will set you free. A chill ran down my spine. Anna had always been a private woman, but I never imagined she kept such a deep secret. The diary, the letters, the medallion, the map, everything seemed to connect to a story I knew nothing about. I began to read the first pages of the diary. The handwriting was indeed Anna's, but the words had a depth and complexity I had rarely seen in her. She wrote about a forgotten past, about wrongs to be righted, and about a love that transcended time. The entries were vague at first, almost poetic, but as I read on, I began to see fragments of a narrative that intertwined with her family's history, with the history of her ancestors. There were mentions of a mysterious illness that plagued her family, of a great injustice committed against someone she loved. And the map, with each page read, seemed to gain more meaning, pointing in a direction to a place where the answers could be found. This mystery, above all, offered me a welcome distraction from the pain and frustration Mariana had caused me. It was a new focus, a challenge that pulled me out of the passivity of waiting, but it also filled me with a growing apprehension. What secrets had Anna kept? What truth would change everything? And what would this journey of discovery reveal about the woman I loved and about Mariana herself? At the end of that chapter of the diary, Anna wrote about the need to fix what was broken, to honor the memory of those who were silenced. And she left an intriguing clue. The guardian of the truth lives where the mountains meet the river, and their wisdom is the key to unveiling the shroud. That sentence echoed in my mind. A guardian, a river, a truth. Anna's mystery was just beginning to unravel, and I knew I wouldn't have peace until all the pieces fit together. Mariana's house stood empty, but my mind was now full of questions, and a new journey, unexpected and fraught with peril, was about to begin. What would I find at the end of the map? And how would it affect my own life and Mariana's? Anna's diary was a labyrinth of emotions and secrets, each page a clue, pulling me deeper into a past I knew nothing about. The letters, still tied with a faded ribbon, seemed to whisper stories waiting to be told. The photograph of that woman, so like Anna, but with an aura of melancholy, and the medallion with the coat of arms, all formed an intriguing mosaic, an invitation to an unexpected journey. The Latin phrase, veritas vos liberabit, resonated in my mind, both a promise and a challenge. In the following days, I immersed myself in the diary, trying to decipher Anna's elegant script and veiled references. She wrote of an illness that was not just physical, but affected the soul. A malady that spread from generation to generation in her family, eroding happiness and peace. There were mentions of a sacrifice and a terrible wrong that had been committed involving land and a broken promise. The name of a small town, Havenwood, appeared repeatedly, always associated with a sense of grief and remorse. The meticulously hand-drawn map seemed to be the geographical key to unlocking the enigma. It pointed to a remote region, deep in the mountains, where a winding river cut through the landscape, and there, marked with an X, was Havenwood. Anna's description of the guardian of the truth who lived where the mountains meet the river seemed to fit that place perfectly. I knew I had to go there, not just to solve Anna's mystery, but also to find a purpose for myself, to fill the void that the situation with Mariana had left. I prepared for the trip in silence, telling no one, not even Dr. Miller or Rick. It was a personal journey, a promise I felt I owed to Anna's memory. I packed a small bag with the essentials, including the diary, the letters, the photograph, and the medallion. Before leaving, I left a message for Rick. Should he need to find me, letting him know I'd be away for a few days, handling personal matters. The road snaked through landscapes that became increasingly wild and untouched. The city's wide avenues gave way to dirt roads, and the buildings to majestic mountains covered in dense vegetation. The air grew cleaner, fresher, and the sound of birds replaced the constant noise of traffic. With every mile, I felt a strange sense of renewal, as if I were shedding the layers of pain and disappointment that had enveloped me. I arrived in Havenwood in the late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky orange and purple, casting long, dramatic shadows over the mountains. The village was small, with old stone houses and narrow streets. A river of crystal-clear water, just like on the map, meandered through the outskirts. It was a picturesque place, but there was a quietness, a serenity that bordered on melancholy. I felt I was in a place where time had stood still, where stories were kept with reverence. I found a small, rustic, and welcoming inn and decided to spend the night there. The next day, I would begin my search for the guardian of the truth. As I ate dinner at a small local restaurant, enjoying a warm soup and fresh bread, I observed the few inhabitants who all seemed to have known each other their whole lives. They spoke in low tones, their faces marked by time and labor. I noticed an elderly woman with hair as white as snow and piercing eyes, sitting alone at a corner table. She watched me with a subtle curiosity that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if she knew I wasn't from around here. The next day, I began to explore the village, following the directions in the diary and on the map. I asked a few locals about elderly people who lived near the river, but I received only vague looks or evasive answers. It seemed there was a secret kept in Havenwood, and the inhabitants were not willing to reveal it to a stranger. Finally, I decided to follow the course of the river, as the map suggested. I walked along narrow paths, between ancient trees, until I reached a clearing. There, isolated from the rest of the village, was a small stone house covered in vines, with a well-tended garden in the back. And, sitting on the porch, weaving a rug with colorful threads, was the same woman I had seen in the restaurant the night before. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a mutual recognition, as if she had been expecting me. She had a calm demeanor, but her eyes conveyed an ancient wisdom. "What brings you to Havenwood, stranger?" she asked, her voice like the soft sound of the wind in the leaves. "It's not often we see outsiders here." I hesitated for a moment, but I felt I could trust her. "My wife, Anna. She left me a mystery to solve," I said, taking Anna's diary from my bag and showing her the photograph and the medallion. She spoke of a guardian of the truth, of a legacy, and she mentioned Havenwood. The old woman looked at the photograph, her eyes welling with a restrained emotion. Her wrinkled fingers touched the coat of arms on the medallion with reverence. A long sigh escaped her lips. "Anna," she whispered, "I have long awaited someone who came bearing Anna's mark. I am Elena, and I know the story your wife wanted you to discover." I felt a thrill. This was the unexpected turning point Anna had promised. Elena was the guardian, and what she had to tell me, I knew, would completely change my understanding of Anna's past, and perhaps of my own life. I was on the brink of a revelation that could be as impactful as the one that had shaken Mariana's life. What was the truth Anna had kept for so long, and what would it reveal about my wife's family history? The mystery of Anna was about to be unveiled. Elena invited me to sit on the porch. On a wooden bench polished by time and use, her eyes, a deep and piercing blue, gazed at me with an intensity that seemed to see beyond my skin, to the very essence of my soul. I felt a mixture of apprehension and relief. Finally, the answers I sought were within reach. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, while the murmur of the river created a gentle soundtrack for the story that was about to unfold. Anna was a woman of secrets. "Elias," Eleanor began, her voice hoarse but laden with ancient wisdom. She held the photograph of the woman who resembled Anna, her wrinkled fingers caressing the image. "This is Sophia, Anna's grandmother, and my older sister, a strong woman with a pure heart, but who was marked by a great injustice." Elena paused, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if reliving every moment of that story. "Our family, the Forresters, has always been tied to these lands, to this village. For many generations, we were the guardians of an ancient knowledge of medicinal herbs and healing practices. We were respected, but also feared by some who viewed us with suspicion, especially in times of ignorance and superstition. She told me about the arrival of a wealthy and influential family to the village, the Caldwells, about a century ago. They coveted the foresters' land, which was fertile and had springs of crystal-clear water, ideal for cultivating herbs. The Caldwells, in their unbridled ambition, began to spread malicious rumors about the Forrester family, accusing them of witchcraft and pagan practices. The community, once united, began to divide, and suspicion grew. Sophia, your wife's grandmother, was the most gifted among us, Elena continued. She possessed a natural gift for healing, a sensitivity to plants that was rare. But she was also in love with a young man from the Caldwell family, a kind-hearted man who did not share his family's ambition and cruelty. Their love was a secret, a refuge amidst the growing animosity. Then happened what Elena called the Great Injustice. A member of the Caldwell family fell gravely ill with a rare and incurable disease. Desperate, they sought Sophia's help. She, moved by compassion and the love she felt for the young Caldwell, tried to cure him with her herbs and knowledge, but the illness was too strong, and the man passed away. The Caldwells then used his death as a pretext to accuse Sophia of murder, of evil witchcraft. The village turned against us, Elena said, her voice choked with the pain of the memory. They burned our house, destroyed our garden, our books of herbal remedies. Sophia was publicly humiliated, dragged through the streets, accused of terrible things. She was exiled, banished from Havenwood, under threat of death if she returned. The young Caldwell, her beloved, tried to defend her, but was confronted by his own family and forced into silence. My eyes widened. The story of public humiliation, of banishment, of such a cruel injustice, echoed strangely with my own recent experience with Mariana. It was as if history were repeating itself, albeit with different contours. I felt a chill run down my spine. Sophia left, taking with her the pain of the injustice and an even greater secret, Elena continued. She was pregnant with the young Caldwell's child, but she swore she would never reveal the paternity to protect the child from the shame and the curse that had been cast upon her and our family. She settled in a distant city, and there she raised her child, her grandchild, and her great-granddaughter, Anna. The revelation hit me with force. Anna, my beloved wife, was a descendant of Sophia, the woman who had suffered such a profound injustice. And the father of her child was a Caldwell, the same name as the family that had caused so much pain. The medallion, with the Caldwell coat of arms, took on a grim significance. Sophia died with a broken heart, but with the hope that one day the truth would be revealed and justice would be served, Elena said. She entrusted Anna with the diary and the letters, asking her to unravel the mystery and restore the Forrester family's good name. But Anna was a delicate woman, and the truth was too heavy a burden for her to bear alone. She knew it took courage to face the past, to unearth the pain. Elena looked me in the eyes, her expression serious. Anna visited me a few times over the years, always with the diary and the letters. She wanted to find a way to bring the truth to light, but she feared the consequences. The diary, Elias, is not just a record of an injustice. It contains clues to where to find the final proof of Sophia's innocence, and also something more, something the Caldwells have hidden for generations, something they stole from our family. The air around me seemed to have grown thicker. Anna's mystery was much bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just about a family secret, but about a historical injustice, a stolen legacy, and the courage of a woman who dared to love. I was on the brink of a discovery that would not only rewrite the history of Anna's family, but could also have profound implications for me and for the meaning of justice in my own life. And what was this something more that the Caldwells had hidden? The answer to that question, I knew, would take me to a new level of challenges and revelations. The cool night breeze began to blow, making the leaves of the trees whisper an ancient melody as Elena told the story of the Forresters and the Caldwells. The sun had completely set, and the first stars were beginning to dot the dark sky, creating a dramatic backdrop for the truth unfolding before me. I was in shock, absorbing every detail of Elena's narrative: the injustice against Sophia, the bravery of her forbidden love, Anna's descent from a lineage so pained and yet so resilient. What the Caldwells hid. Elias, Elena continued, her voice almost a whisper but with an unshakable strength, was the knowledge, the books of herbal remedies, the records of cures, the notes on the properties of the land and the springs, everything that defined the Forrester family as guardians of local wisdom. They didn't just want the lands, they wanted to erase our history, our identity, so they could take possession of everything without resistance. She explained that after Sophia's banishment and the destruction of the Forrester home, the Caldwells had confiscated what remained, including valuables and, most importantly, the rare and priceless manuscripts containing generations of knowledge. They said it was to prevent the spread of heresies, Elena said, a trace of bitter irony in her voice. But in reality, they knew the value of that knowledge, the knowledge of the land, of the plants, of natural medicine. They wanted it for themselves, to profit from it. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The mysterious illness Anna had mentioned in the diary, the malady that spread through her family, now made sense. It wasn't a physical disease, but the pain of injustice, the weight of a guarded secret, the loss of a legacy, and the Latin phrase, "De veritas vos liberabit," took on a new, profound meaning. The truth would not only free Sophia from her stain, but also the Forrester family from a historical burden. Anna's diary, I said, pointing to the book in my hands, contains clues about where to find this final proof and what was stolen. Elena nodded. Yes, Sophia, even in exile, managed to leave some hidden notes which were passed down through generations to Anna. She wrote about a secret place within the Caldwell estate, a location where she hid a copy of some of the most important manuscripts before our house was destroyed. A sanctuary, she called it, and also about a letter written by the young Caldwell, confessing his family's deceit and Sophia's innocence. The idea of a secret sanctuary, of a letter that could rehabilitate Sophia's name and expose the truth about the Caldwells, filled me with a renewed determination. It was a mission, not just for Anna, but for justice. I felt a new purpose in my heart, a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. My own pain with Mariana, though still present, seemed smaller in the face of the magnitude of that historical injustice. "Do the Caldwells still live in the village?" I asked. Eleanor shook her head. Not anymore. The family moved to the big city a few decades ago, after the death of the last of the old Caldwells. Their estate, the grand mansion on the hill, was sold and now belongs to a foreign businessman who uses it as a summer home. He rarely comes here, but the secret, Elias, is still there, and the manuscripts, if they still exist, are the key to unlocking the truth. The challenge seemed enormous, trespassing on private property in search of ancient documents to unravel a century-old secret. But the promise of justice for Sophia, for Anna's lineage, was a powerful motivator. I had to do this, for Anna, for Sophia, and for myself. "I have to go there," I said, my voice filled with conviction. Elena looked at me with a concerned expression. "It will be dangerous, Elias. The Caldwells, even absent, still have influence, and the businessman who bought the property is known for his privacy and for having vigilant security. Besides, the place has its own traps. created to protect what Sophia hid there. She then gave me more details from the diary, pointing to passages that spoke of a path of hidden stones, a secret spring, and a crescent moon symbol that would indicate the entrance to the sanctuary. And she warned me, many have tried to find the sanctuary, driven by curiosity or greed, but none have succeeded. Only those with a pure heart and a true intention of justice can find the way. Those words touched me deeply. I felt that the journey was not just physical, but also spiritual. It was a test of my own integrity. I had to be worthy of Anna's trust, worthy of her memory. The next day, I began planning my exploration of the old Caldwell estate. Elena provided me with a more detailed map of the area, drawn by Sophia, and some tips about the dangers of the place. She lent me an old lantern and a canteen of fresh water, and wished me luck with a look that mixed hope and apprehension. I walked toward the mansion, which stood on a hilltop, imposing and mysterious. The high stone walls, covered in moss, seemed to guard ancient secrets. I felt an adrenaline rush in my veins. It was a new kind of challenge, very different from the emotional battles I had recently fought, and I was ready to face it. But what would I find within those walls? And what would I do to overcome the obstacles Elena had warned about, the traps created to protect the secret? The journey was just beginning, and I felt that the past and present would intertwine in ways I could never have imagined. The imposing walls of the old Caldwell estate rose before me, covered in a thick ivy that seemed to embrace the secrets residing within. The wrought iron gate, rusted and massive, was locked, sporting a padlock as ancient as the walls themselves. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with untold stories, with eloquent silences. The air was crisp, but the tension in my shoulders was palpable. I was about to enter unknown territory, a place where the history of Anna and her family lay buried. Following Elena's instructions and the notes in Sophia's diary, I searched for a less conspicuous entrance, a weak point in the property's robust defense. I remembered Elena's words about the path of hidden stones, and began to circle the wall, my eyes fixed on the ground, searching for any unusual sign. After a few minutes of careful searching, I found what appeared to be a slightly lower section of the wall, where the ivy was thinner. A small pile of loose stones, camouflaged by the vegetation, indicated a foothold. With considerable effort, and using an agility I didn't know I still possessed, I climbed the wall. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of excitement and apprehension. Once on the other side, I carefully climbed down, landing softly on a carpet of dry leaves. The estate was vast, with overgrown gardens and ancient trees that formed a dark canopy, filtering the sunlight into golden beams. The mansion, in the distance, seemed even more grand and mysterious. I began my search, following the directions in Sophia's diary. The descriptions were poetic, almost enigmatic, but Elena had helped me decipher them. I was looking for a secret spring, a place where water bubbled up from the earth, and a crescent moon symbol carved in stone. I walked along moss-covered paths, through dense bushes and gnarled trees, feeling the presence of history with every step. With every turn, I felt more immersed in Sophia's narrative. I imagined her steps, her fears, her determination as she hid her treasures. The place had a wild beauty, but also a sense of abandonment, as if nature was slowly reclaiming what was once grand. After about an hour of searching, I reached a more remote area where the sound of running water became audible. I followed the sound and, to my surprise, discovered a small grotto hidden by a miniature waterfall. The water cascaded over moss-covered rocks, creating a shimmering veil. It was the secret spring. With a racing heart, I searched for the crescent moon symbol. It took a few minutes, but I finally found it, carved into a smooth rock near the entrance of the grotto. It was a discreet carving, almost invisible at first glance, but unmistakable. My hands trembled slightly as I touched it, feeling the roughness of the stone and the weight of the history it held. I entered the grotto, using the lantern Elena had lent me. The air inside was damp and cool, with the smell of wet earth and mildew. The lantern light danced on the rocky walls, revealing stalactites and stalagmites that looked like natural sculptures. It was a place of serene beauty, but also of mystery. And then I saw it. Hidden behind a large rock was a recess in the wall, covered by an old, dusty canvas. Carefully, I pulled the canvas aside. There it was, a small wooden box, very old, with a bronze clasp corroded by time. And next to it, a bundle of letters tied with a raffia string. My fingers trembled as I opened the box. Inside were several volumes of manuscripts bound in leather in Sophia's handwriting. They were the books of herbal remedies, the records of cures, the ancestral knowledge of the Forrester family that the Caldwells had stolen. I flipped through a few pages, seeing drawings of plants, complex formulas, notes on the healing properties of each. It was a treasure. And then I picked up the bundle of letters. The first one I opened was yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was different, more formal, but unmistakable. It was the handwriting of the young Caldwell. In the letter, he confessed his love for Sophia and his family's deceit. He asked for forgiveness, revealing that his father had fabricated the accusations to seize the Forresters' land and their knowledge. He expressed his shame and promised that, one day, the truth would be revealed. The letter was the irrefutable proof of Sophia's innocence, the certificate of her honor. A wave of emotion washed over me. The journey to this point had been long and full of twists, but there, in that dark grotto, I had found not only the secrets of Anna and her family, but also a deep connection to the story of injustice and love that bound them. I felt I was fulfilling Anna's promise, honoring Sophia's memory. I packed the manuscripts and the letter carefully, protecting them in my bag. The lantern light cast dancing shadows in the grotto as I prepared to leave. But as I turned, a subtle sound made me stop. A movement, a slight rustle of leaves coming from the entrance of the grotto. It wasn't the wind. A chill ran down my spine. Someone was outside, someone who, perhaps, was not happy with my discovery. The quiet of the grotto was broken by the growing sense that I was not alone. The truth had been revealed, but the dangers, I knew, were still lurking. What awaited me outside that grotto, and who was watching me, now that I had unveiled such a well-kept secret? The answer would come sooner than I expected. The rustling of leaves intensified, accompanied by the cracking of twigs, and the shadow of a tall, burly figure blocked the entrance to the grotto. My heart pounded, and I instinctively recoiled, clutching the bag to my chest. The lantern's light, once my ally, now seemed only to highlight my vulnerability. The man's face was in shadow, but I could feel the hostility in his posture. He was no local. His attire was that of private security, and his eyes, even in the dim light, glinted with a cold determination. "What are you doing here?" His voice was deep and authoritarian, echoing off the grotto walls. "This is private property. You're trespassing." I struggled to remain calm, though panic threatened to consume me. I got lost," I stammered, a weak excuse that barely made it out of my throat. He chuckled, a dry, mocking sound. "Lost? Funny, because it looks like you found exactly what you were looking for." His eyes fixed on my bag, and I knew there was no way to hide what I'd found. "I don't know what you're talking about," I tried, but my voice failed me. He took a step forward, and I backed away further until I felt the cold rock wall against my back. "Don't play dumb. We know who you are. We know you came looking for something, and we know you found it." He gestured with his hand, and another man, equally large and menacing, appeared at the grotto's entrance, blocking my only escape route. I felt a chill run down my spine. These were not common thugs. They knew who I was, or at least that I was the trespasser who had uncovered a secret. This meant someone had sent them, that someone was protecting the mystery I had discovered. The Caldwell family, though absent, still wielded their influence. Or perhaps the new owner of the mansion was more than just a businessman. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound firmer. "What you have in the bag," the first guard said, holding out his hand. "Hand it over, and maybe we can forget you were ever here." My heart tightened. "Hand over Sophia's manuscripts, the young Caldwell's letter, the treasure I had worked so hard to find." No, I couldn't. Not after everything. It was the proof of Sophia's innocence, Anna's legacy. "No," I said, my voice now firm, surprising even myself. "This belongs to the Forrester family. It's stolen treasure, and I'm not giving it to you." The guard's lips tightened into a thin line, his eyes dark with anger. "You're making this difficult, old man. We don't want to hurt you, but if we have to." The second guard took a step forward, and I knew I stood no chance against two men so strong and determined. I was not a fighting man. My strength was in my mind, in my intelligence, not in my fists. "Come on, Elias, we don't have to do this," the first guard said, his voice a little softer, trying to persuade me. "Just hand over the papers, and you're free to go." I closed my eyes for an instant. In thinking of Anna, of Sophia, of the promise of justice, I couldn't give up now, but what could I do? I was cornered, alone, and outnumbered. It was then that an unusual sound cut through the air, not a human sound, but a deep, distant howl that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. The two guards glanced at each other, a flicker of apprehension in their eyes. "What was that?" the second guard asked, his voice less confident. Probably a wolf," the first replied, but his tone was uncertain. "We should hurry this up." The howl repeated, closer this time, and I could distinguish a second, higher-pitched one. There seemed to be more than one animal. A shiver, not of fear, but of a strange hope, ran down my spine. Suddenly, a swift movement at the grotto's entrance. A dark shadow burst in, not a wolf, but a massive guard dog with sharp teeth and glowing eyes. It snarled furiously, fixing its gaze on the guards, and right behind it, to my surprise and relief, appeared Elena, her small, frail figure imbued with an aura of determination that seemed larger than the dog itself. "Get away from him!" Elena boomed, her voice echoing with unexpected force. "You have no right to be here, to bother this man. He is on land that belongs to the Forresters, by right." The guards backed away, surprised by Elena's appearance and, even more, by the dog's ferocity. They seemed hesitant, torn between their employer's orders and the fear of an animal attack. "You are not welcome here," Elena continued, her gaze fixed on them, unshakable. "Leave, before the guardian of the forest finds you." The guardian of the forest, the dog, I realized, was more than a simple pet. He was Elena's protector, and perhaps of the truth itself. The guards, after a brief moment of hesitation, exchanged glances and, with a grunt of frustration, turned and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. I watched them go, my body relaxing from the stress of the confrontation. Elena approached, the dog at her side, her eyes meeting mine with the same intensity as before, but now with a gleam of approval. "You were brave, Elias," she said. "I knew you would find the way, and I knew they would come." "How did you know?" I asked, still a bit breathless. "The spirit of this land whispers its secrets," she replied with a faint smile. "And I have my ways. I sensed you were in danger and came to help." She knelt and petted the dog's head, which was now wagging its tail gently. "This is Ranger. He's a good protector." I looked at Ranger, then at Elena, feeling an immense gratitude. She had not only guided me to the truth, but had also saved me from imminent danger. But the presence of the guards confirmed something. The Caldwells, or whoever was behind them, were still active, trying to keep the secret buried. "They won't give up," I said, thinking of the manuscripts and the letter in my bag. Elena shook her head. "No, but now we have the truth. And the truth, Elias, is a powerful weapon. It's time to unmask the lie and restore honor. But the final battle is yet to come. And it will be fought in a place where past and present will meet and where justice will finally prevail. Are you ready for the next step?" Eleanor's question was not a query, but a challenge. I knew the answer was yes. But what exactly did she have in mind? And how would I, Elias, a father in search of redemption, become the herald of justice for such an old story? Fate, I realized, was calling me to a much larger stage than I could have ever imagined. Elena guided me out of the grotto, Ranger, the guardian dog, sniffing the air with silent vigilance. The night had fallen completely, and the forest was immersed in a deep silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant murmur of the river. I still felt the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but the presence of Elena and Ranger brought me a sense of security. I was not alone in this battle. "What do we do now, Elena?" I asked, feeling the weight of the manuscripts and the letter in my bag. The evidence I carried was the key to unlocking a century-old mystery, to righting an injustice that had corroded a family's soul. Elena looked at me, her eyes shining in the darkness, with an intensity that told me she had already planned everything. "We will expose the truth, Elias. Not just the truth of the injustice against Sophia, but also the truth about what the Caldwells stole and hid. And we will do it where it all began, in the village." The idea surprised me. I had imagined a legal confrontation, a complicated lawsuit, but Elena seemed to have something more direct, more impactful in mind. "How will we do that?" I asked. "There is an old tradition in Havenwood," she explained. "Once a year, on the night of the full moon, the community gathers in the central square to tell stories, to share wisdom, and to honor the memory of our ancestors. It is a time of unity, of transparency, and it is there that the truth will be revealed." I felt a shiver, a public revelation, before the entire community. It was a bold move, risky, but somehow it felt like the right path. Sophia's humiliation had been public, her rehabilitation should be as well. And the Caldwells' hypocrisy had to be exposed before those they had deceived. "When is the next full moon?" I asked. "Tomorrow night," she replied with a faint smile. "Fate, Elias, is sometimes very punctual." The urgency of the situation filled me with a new determination. We spent the rest of the night at Elena's house, planning the details. I read Sophia's manuscripts, the young Caldwell's letter, absorbing every word, every detail of that story. Elena told me more about life in Havenwood, about the influence the Caldwells wielded over the simpler families, about the fear that still lingered in some hearts. She explained that the community of Havenwood had been for generations, divided by the story of the Forresters and the Caldwells. Some still believed the rumors of witchcraft, others just feared retaliation from the powerful. The truth, she said, needed to be told in a way the community could accept, could understand. The next morning, Elena took me to an old barn behind her house. There, carefully stored in a wooden chest, was a hand loom, old and dusty, but still functional. "This is my grandmother's loom," Elena said, and she used it to weave stories into her rugs. The colors, the symbols, each thread told a part of the truth. "And tonight, Elias, you will help me weave Sophia's story in a way that no one can deny." I looked at the loom, then at Elena, confused. "Weave a story, but how?" "You will narrate the facts." "Elias," she explained, "while I weave the symbols of Sophia's story, The sun for the young Caldwell's love, the crescent moon for the hope of justice, the river for Sophia's purity, the mountains for the strength of the Forrester family. The colors will tell the emotion. It is a language everyone in Havenwood understands, an ancient tradition they cannot ignore. I felt a lump in my throat. This was the perfect way to expose the truth, a way that would transcend words and touch the hearts of the community. It wasn't a formal trial, but an act of restoring honor. It was art and justice intertwined. As the day progressed, I reviewed Sophia's diary and the young Caldwell's letter, while Elena prepared the colored threads for the loom. Ranger, the dog, stayed by my side like a silent guardian. Time seemed to fly, and the tension mounted with each minute. When the full moon began to rise on the horizon, a majestic silver circle, the central square of Havenwood, was already full. Men, women, and children gathered, some sitting on wooden benches, others standing, talking in low voices. A bonfire crackled in the center of the square, its flames dancing and casting flickering shadows on the faces of the crowd. Elena and I, accompanied by Ranger, approached. She carried the loom, covered with a linen cloth, and I, the bag with the evidence. All eyes turned to us, a mix of curiosity, recognition, and a slight apprehension. They knew who Eleanor was, the village wise woman, and my presence, a stranger, surely sparked speculation. Elena, with her dignified posture, placed the loom near the fire. "Friends and neighbors," she said, her voice clear and strong, reaching everyone. "Tonight, the full moon invites us to share stories. And I, Elena, along with this man, Elias, will bring you a story that needs to be told. A truth that has long been silenced." I felt my heart pound in my chest. The moment had come. Elena uncovered the loom, and the colored threads shone in the firelight. She looked at me, and I knew it was my turn. The truth, Anna's legacy, Sophia's injustice, all depended on my voice, on my ability to tell this story. I, a man who had been humiliated, was now here to fight for the honor of others. It was the greatest challenge of my life. How would the community react to the truth? And what would this revelation mean for the future of Havenwood, for Sophia's memory, and for my own journey? The climax was approaching, and the wind, I felt, was about to change direction. The flickering light of the bonfire danced across the attentive faces of the Havenwood community as Eleanor unveiled the loom. The silence in the square was almost reverent, a testament to the deep connection these people had with their traditions. I felt all eyes on me, and for a moment a cold panic threatened to consume me. But then I remembered Anna, Sophia, and the promise of justice I had made. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak. My voice, hesitant at first, gained strength as I delved into the story. I told them about Anna, about the diary and map she had left me, the seed of a mystery that brought me to Havenwood. I spoke of Sophia, the gifted young woman, the pure-hearted healer, and her forbidden love for the young Caldwell. As I narrated, Elena began to work the loom, her wrinkled fingers moving with deft skill, weaving the symbols and colors that brought my words to life. Sophia's sun was woven in golden threads, shining at the center of the tapestry. The crescent moon, a symbol of hope and mystery, appeared in silver tones. The river, the heart of the village, took shape in crystalline blue threads, representing the purity of Sophia's soul. The mountains, in shades of green and brown, emerged as a testament to the strength and resilience of the Forrester family. With each emotion, Elena changed the colors, conveying the pain, hope, sadness, and strength of the story. I recounted the arrival of the Caldwells, their voracious ambition, their greed for the Forresters, land and knowledge. I told them of the fatal illness, the false accusation, the public humiliation, and Sophia's banishment. With every word, I saw the expressions on the faces of the villagers change. Some of the older ones had tears in their eyes. reliving a story they might have only heard in whispers. The younger ones, with curiosity and bewilderment on their faces, seemed to absorb every detail as if discovering a new world. And then I reached the crucial point. I took out Sophia's manuscripts from my bag, the books of herbal remedies, the records of cures. "This," I said, holding up one of the volumes for all to see, "is what the Caldwells truly stole. Not just land, but knowledge, wisdom, the identity of the Forrester family. They called it witchcraft, but it was science. It was healing. It was a legacy." A murmur of astonishment and outrage rippled through the crowd. Many of Havenwood's residents still remembered the stories of the Forresters, the cures they provided, the respect they commanded before the Caldwells arrived. Next, I took out the yellowed letter from the young Caldwell. "And this," I continued, my voice thick with emotion, "is the final proof of Sophia's innocence. A confession written by the son of her accusers that reveals the truth behind the sham." I began to read excerpts from the letter, the young Caldwell's words echoing in the square, revealing the deceit, the regret, the plea for forgiveness. The silence that followed the reading was even more profound than before. It was a silence of shock, of understanding, of a contained anger. The truth, so long buried, had finally been unearthed. The people of Havenwood looked at one another, their eyes now filled with a new light, a new perspective. The story they had been told for generations, the Caldwells' version, was crumbling before their eyes. As I finished my narrative, Elena had completed her tapestry. It was a work of art, a visual chronicle of Sophia's story, with symbols and colors telling a tale of love, injustice, and the relentless search for truth. She held it up, and in the light of the full moon, the tapestry shone, a silent and powerful testament. An elderly man, his face wrinkled and his eyes misty, stood up. "I remember the stories," he said, his voice trembling. "My grandmother always said the Forresters were good people, that they only wanted to help, but the fear was too strong for us to speak." Other villagers began to speak up, some with tears, others with indignation. The truth had awakened a collective memory in them, a sense of justice that had been suppressed for decades. The veil of lies had been torn away. Elena looked at me, a gentle smile forming on her lips. "Veritas vos liberabit," she whispered, repeating the Latin phrase from Anna's diary, and I felt she was right. Not only was the community of Havenwood being freed from a deception, but I also felt a weight being lifted from my own shoulders. The pain with Mariana, though still there, seemed to find a new context, a new meaning. I had found a purpose larger than my own sorrow. That night, the community united around the bonfire, discussing the story, sharing their own memories and feelings. Elena and I were surrounded by people who wanted to know more, who wanted to express their gratitude for the truth. Elena's tapestry was placed in a prominent spot, a monument to Sophia's memory and to restored justice. The main conflicts of the story had been resolved. Sophia's honor was restored, the Forrester family's legacy was recovered, and the community of Havenwood could finally reconcile with its past. But my own journey was not yet over. The issue of Mariana still hung in the air. The transformation I had experienced in Havenwood, the strength I had found in the pursuit of justice, needed to be brought back to my own life, to my own home. I knew that reconciliation with my daughter would be the final step, the proof that the truth does, in fact, set you free. And I was ready to face it, armed with the wisdom I had gained and the hope of a new beginning. The next morning in Havenwood dawned with a soft, promising glow. The air was crisp and the singing of birds filled the air with a melody of renewal. The square, where the truth had been revealed the night before, was now quiet, but a sense of lightness hung over the village. The community had gathered, discussed, cried, and finally embraced the truth about Sophia and the Caldwells. Elena's tapestry, with its vibrant colors and eloquent symbols, was displayed at the entrance of her house, a memorial to courage and justice. I said goodbye to Elena with a tight hug. Her eyes, which had once regarded me with curiosity and mystery, now shone with affection and recognition. "You fulfilled your promise to Anna, Elias," she said, her voice soft. "And you found more than you expected. The truth has set us all free. And now, Elias, it's time for you to free yourself." I knew what she meant. The journey through Havenwood had transformed me. The pain of humiliation, the hurt over Mariana, all of it, though still present, had been put into perspective by the magnitude of the injustice I had helped to correct. I had found a greater purpose, an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. The armor of my suit had indeed shattered, but in its place, a new, more resilient core had emerged. On the way back home, with Anna's diary and Sophia's manuscripts in my bag, thoughts of Mariana occupied my mind. My decision to give her responsibility for her own actions, not giving her the house, handing her the evidence against her husband, had been painful but necessary. I hoped with every fiber of my being that she had used this time to reflect, to grow, to find her own path. I arrived home, feeling both the weight and the lightness of the Havenwood experience. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Now, there was a sense of hope, of expectation. The phone sat on the table, and I stared at it for a long moment. It was time to take the initiative, to extend a hand to my daughter, not as a father who blindly forgives everything, but as one who seeks true reconciliation based on truth and mutual respect. With my heart pounding, I picked up the phone and dialed Mariana's number. It rang several times, and I feared she wouldn't answer, that she had cut herself off completely. But then I heard her voice. Low and a bit hesitant. "Dad," she said. "Mariana," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need to talk. Are you willing?" There was a brief silence on the other end, and then I heard a sigh. "Yes, Dad. I think I need to." We arranged to meet the next day at a quiet coffee shop she used to frequent. The night was long, filled with reflections and expectations. I reviewed in my mind everything Elena had taught me, the importance of truth, compassion, and justice. When I saw her at the coffee shop the next morning, she looked different. She wasn't wearing expensive clothes or excessive makeup. She was simple, with a more serious, more mature expression. Her eyes, though still holding a trace of sadness, had a new clarity. There was no arrogance, none of the panic from before. "Dad," she began, her voice a little choked. I did what you asked. I filed for divorce, and I'm working." "At a small shop near my apartment." A faint smile touched her lips. "It's hard. It's very different from what I imagined, but I'm learning." I felt an immense relief. The seeds I had planted were beginning to sprout. "And what did you do with the envelope, Mariana? The evidence against him?" She looked me in the eye, her expression serious. "I used it, Dad, to protect myself. He tried to blame me, to drag me into his problems, but I had the proof, and my lawyer helped me. He's under investigation. I didn't report him directly, but I used the information to shield myself. It was the first time I felt strong. My heart swelled with pride. She was learning to defend herself, to be responsible for her own choices. "You did the right thing, my daughter. For you." She took my hand, her eyes welling up. "I'm so sorry, Dad, for everything, for hurting you, for being so blind, for humiliating you. I realized how naive I was, how manipulated I was, and how much you truly love me." Tears streamed down my own face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and of a love that was finally being understood and reciprocated. "I have always loved you, Mariana, and I always will, but my love also has to teach you to be strong, to be fair, to be worthy of yourself. Our conversation lasted for hours. I told her about Havenwood, about Sophia, about Eleanor, about the search for truth and the restoration of justice. She listened intently, her eyes fixed on me, absorbing every word. I felt that the story of Anna and Sophia resonated with her, like an echo of her own learning. At the end, she looked at me with an expression of new understanding. "The house is still frozen, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, "until you're ready, not just financially, but emotionally. Until you understand its true value, the value of effort, of dignity, of independence." She nodded. "I understand, Dad, and I'm going to prove I'm ready. I'm going to build something for myself, not to impress you, but for me, to be the woman you always wanted me to be." I hugged her, a tight hug filled with years of love and pain, of learning and hope. It wasn't a magic solution, an instant return to what we were. Trust would have to be rebuilt. Forgiveness would have to be worked on day after day, but it was a beginning. It was the true emotional resolution. I didn't give her the house that day. I gave her back the responsibility for her own actions, and she, finally, was ready to accept it. The lesson was harsh, but perhaps one day she would truly understand that it was the greatest gift I had ever given her. My journey of suffering and overcoming had reached its end, but Mariana's journey of learning and growth was just beginning. I would watch her flourish, I knew, and as I watched her walk away, I felt a deep peace in my heart. Life, with its unexpected twists, its pains and its joys, had taught me that truth. Justice and unconditional love, however painful, were the most solid pillars on which to build a life. And I was ready to live it, one day at a time, with newfound wisdom and renewed hope.